So I was thinking about what video to make today, and I thought about a monster that I imagine many, including myself to an extent, wouldn't actually call a monster. I'd actually say it's more of a race. But for simplicity's sake, and because of the fact in The Witcher they refer to it as an intelligent monster, I will just refer to them as such. Anyway, this monster is known as a Doppler, and in today's entry, I'll tell you everything we know about them. To begin, I want to discuss what we know, or can at least assume about this creature's origins. One of the questions I had when doing research on this monster is whether Dopplers were pre- or post-conjunction creatures. Basically, this means if they arrived on the world before or after the cataclysmic event known as the conjunction of the spheres, which basically caused a lot of different monsters and races to end up on different worlds. Now, it isn't actually said anywhere whether they are pre- or post-conjunction, but it is said they used to live in areas such as the place where Novigrad was ultimately settled by humans. From this, we can assume that they may be pre-conjunction, as it has been stated that humans first arrived during the conjunction of the spheres, and the elves said that they destroyed their old world. It's not really worth getting into now, but I will get into it in a later video. But anyway, as the Dopplers lived there first, and then were hunted and killed by the human settlers, perhaps these humans had only recently arrived from the conjunction of spheres, making Dopplers, of course, pre-conjunction. Although it is of course possible humans had lived in the world for centuries at that point, and only then decided to settle that area of land, meaning that Dopplers could have also arrived in the conjunction, but just happened to settle the area before humans. But one thing I'm also wondering is that Novigrad was said to have been built upon elven ruins, so perhaps before the humans came to say Novigrad, the Dopplers lived in harmony with the elves, although this obviously hasn't been said anywhere. So basically, to summarize, we don't actually know if they're pre- or post-conjunction, but I'm leaning towards pre-conjunction based on what I just said there, but also based on how in the games they are classed as relicts. One other fact that I thought I'd quickly add is that Dopplers actually have 4 other known names, at least in the books. These names being Shifter, Double, Imitator, and Pavrat. Moving on, I want to discuss the abilities, or I suppose ability, Dopplers possess, as it is a pretty unique ability in the Witcher universe. Dopplers possess the ability to transform into humans, non-humans, animals, basically anything of a similar mass to them. So for example, they couldn't turn into a cyclops, giant, or mouse, but they could turn into a dwarf or human. I do believe, based on what I've read in the books and seen in the games, that Dopplers can't say just turn into a chair. Although I don't think it's been said that they can't, they simply never have, and I do have my own reason for this that I'll get into soon. When Dopplers actually transform, they not only turn into whoever their target is, but they replicate their target exactly. And what this means is, for example, you have someone wearing a woolen coat, a Doppler turns into them, and then the Doppler in their form would appear to be wearing a woolen coat. But on top of that, if you were to actually then feel the Doppler's coat, it would feel like wool. Another example would be in the books, when a Doppler turns into Dandelion and then has his lute in hand. That lute would also, of course, be an exact replica and work like a lute. Now, the reason this is impressive is that, say if a mage were to use an illusion for clothing, I believe it generally would simply be that an illusion could be dispelled and wouldn't feel quite right to the touch, but for a Doppler, they physically take on the characteristics of that entire being. In the books, Geralt discusses this in detail and states that many sorcerers believe what Dopplers are capable of doing is similar to lycanthropy, but he personally believes it is either an entirely different mechanism or something similar to lycanthropy, only with an underlying force 1,000 times greater. So, what Dopplers do is not an illusion. They complete a full-on metamorphosis. They don't just make themselves look like their victims, they become their victims. What's also interesting is that Geralt states in their changed form, Dopplers can't be detected by magic. I imagine it's because the copy is so exact that the medallions you might use or spells just simply can't pick them up. It's similar to how higher vampires in human form can also not be detected by magic. Something else that is very interesting is that when they transform, they not only take on their target's physical appearance, but they also take on their target's character, feelings, and thoughts. As Geralt puts it, they take on their target's very soul. Geralt even states that he believes this proves the soul and body are not two separate entities, but one and the same. They can also use their ability to become an exact copy of someone instantly. so they don't need to see someone and process their appearance. They can just see them and become an exact copy instantaneously. This also isn't something a Doppler could simply explain how they do, it's more like a reflex and something they know how to do. Sort of like how humans can't really explain how they know how to breathe. It's just a natural thing that you can do. Something else you may be wondering in regards to when Dopplers say replicate clothes, or in some cases, like with Dandelion's loot, items, is what happens if you were to take that item or piece of clothing from a Doppler. Well, let's just say it would be painful, because as soon as that item loses contact with the Doppler, it turns into skin. I also talked earlier about how I would explain why I think Dopplers can't or don't transform into inanimate objects, and I think it may be to do with whatever they turn into, they take on some form of their target's cognitive functions. So if they turn into, say, a chair, they would lack a brain and therefore not be able to turn back. So because living things have brains, they are able to maintain their own conscious through their target's brain. Also, of course, they would lack just the general means to be alive, so perhaps turning into the example I said before, a chair, would just kill them. I now want to discuss the general nature of this species. Of course, Dopplers are all different, but there are still general personality traits seen throughout the species on the whole. In the Witcher 3 bestiary, it states that Dopplers are both incredibly intelligent and cunning. This combined with their ability to transform would of course make them excellent assassins. However, Dopplers don't really do this, as I'm sure you can tell from playing the games or reading the books. This is because, generally, they are quite generous and timid. This means that Dopplers generally only fight as a last resort. In the books, this can be seen when Dudu impersonates Geralt, and of course, he takes on Geralt's personality traits. However, they don't end up fighting after Geralt confronts him further and basically tells Dudu that despite him taking his form, he can never truly understand why he is capable of what he is capable of. This may have been more personal to Dudu, as Geralt sort of talks about how he's clearly innocent based on the fact he has a nickname and he lets someone earlier on in the book live. You sort of have to read it to know all of it, but it's more of Geralt sort of saying his opinion on Dudu as an individual. However, in The Witcher 3, we also see Dopplers running away first before fighting. Obviously, the Doppler in this case was willing to fight Geralt when pursued, so it's not exactly a cut and dry rule that Dopplers just won't fight. However, in the books, it is said that Dopplers don't use their ability to transform in order to attack people. It's mainly for defense, or in Dudu's case, to live in Novigrad and make money and basically to not be starving all the time, so I suppose they can use their ability to live in luxury or just to survive. As for a Doppler's appearance, without transforming, we never actually get to see one in the games. However, there is some Gwent art depicting pretty much what was described in the books. In the books, Dopplers have been described as looking like a massive fermenting dough, with pasty skin, long tongues, and droopy lips. Basically, they kind of look like a toddler's attempt at making a person out of clay. They also, at least in the games, are said to revert back to this form when they come in contact with silver. Although yet again, I'm not entirely sure how true this is, as obviously when we fight a Doppler with a silver sword in The Witcher 3, they don't turn back immediately. By the way, I'm getting this information from a conversation with Menga where he offers Geralt a silver goblet with some Sidarian drink, and Geralt basically tells him he knows it's to test if he's a Doppler or not, and then Menga goes on to say that you'd be surprised how many people go in there and turn into rancid jelly as soon as they grip the goblet. And I'm going to assume the rancid jelly description is in reference to their normal appearance, just based on the sourdough description we got in the books. Now I want to briefly discuss what environment you can generally find these monsters in. In times past, Dopplers were generally found in areas such as the area where Novigrad was built. However, when human settlers arrived, they were hunted like dogs and their natural environments were mostly destroyed. For example, the construction of Novigrad destroyed their home there. So now, I believe they like to try and cohabit with humans, and this can obviously be seen with Dudu and Chapelle in the books, but also with the various Dopplers we encounter in the games. In the books, Dudu states that he ran with a pack of wolves for a few weeks at one point. I believe he had been attacked by the same pack, so simply transformed into one of them in order to survive. So perhaps there are many Dopplers in the wild simply living as animals. I will now list the key Dopplers throughout the games and the books, and provide a little bit of information on each. The first is of course Dudu, although this is just a nickname as his actual name is Teleco Lungrevink Letorta. Geralt first encounters this Doppler when visiting Novigrad with Dandelion, and I will discuss this story in future, but if you're interested, you can simply read it yourself in the Witcher book, The Sword of Destiny. This character also of course appears in The Witcher 3. There is a Doppler known as Forced Bolin, who appears in the Witcher graphic novel known as The Witcher Curse of Crows. This Doppler was a murderer who killed his victims whilst they slept, and then he robbed them. Obviously this contradicts what I said earlier in regards to their nature, but as this is a graphic novel, I wouldn't exactly consider it canon, and it's certainly not entirely consistent with the established game lore. However, as so little is known about Dopplers in the books, perhaps it is consistent with the book Dopplers. Next, there is Yana, a Doppler who is the subject of the contract known as an elusive thief. This Doppler had been pestering local Novigrad merchants, and Geralt had been hired to deal with him. Geralt can either kill him or let him go. It doesn't really have much consequence past that. You do get to fight your own Geralt in this contract though, as the Doppler takes on your character's appearance, replicating your armor, weapons, etc. So it's pretty fun, especially when you can see Geralt actually reacting to seeing himself in person. Finally, we have Chappelle. Although this Doppler is not actually called Chappelle, he just took on Chappelle's appearance when he died. Chappelle was the leader of the Novigrad Secret Service, but died due to a heart attack. Then, a Doppler who happened to be nearby assumed his appearance. This Doppler was present in the Novigrad Doppler story involving Dudu, Geralt, and Dandelion in The Sword of Destiny, but also appears when we first enter Novigrad in The Witcher 3. At that point, he had been found out by Menga and burned at the stake. Anyway guys, that's it for today's Witcher lore video, and I hope you've all enjoyed. This monster is one of those monsters I remember kind of confusing me when I first became interested in the Witcher lore, so in today's video, I've tried to put in some of the questions I remember having about this monster, such as the transforming into inanimate objects, and what happened if you remove their transformed clothing, so I hope to have cleared up any confusions you guys might have had, and also just informed you more about another Witcher monster. But yeah, be sure to like today's video to support content like this, and to let me know you want more. Also be sure to subscribe, as I make Witcher videos every week, and if you subscribe, you won't miss them. My question for today is a bit different to my normal questions, as today I simply want to know how you would all feel about a Doppler turning into you, and therefore understanding your innermost thoughts, even the thoughts you didn't quite realize you had. Personally, I wouldn't like it, but of course it would be an interesting experience, and maybe I'd find out something about myself that I never actually knew, which I suppose might be good or bad. Be sure to follow my Twitter, and finally, as always, a big thank you to the Patreon pledges. You guys are honestly amazing, and thank you all so much. I'm glad to put all your names at the end of these videos, and I really appreciate your continued support. Also, thanks to everyone who likes, subscribes, comments, or even follows my Twitter. I do really appreciate you guys. But anyway, that's it for today's video, and I'll see you in the next one. Have an awesome rest of the week.